Thank you, Ed. So now we'll move on to our second speaker. So this is Matthew Wardner. Matthew is founder and managing director of Inverroy Crisis Management Limited. For the last 10 years provided resilience support to energy sector, ranging from oil and gas majors, wind farms, and to European Marine Energy Centre in Albany, which we were talking about earlier. Very nice. Prior to that, Matthew was an army officer for 27 years. He is a fellow of the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management and a fellow of the Emergency Planning Society. Over to you, Matt.
Sure, thank you very much. Good morning. Yes, gentlemen, Mr. Chicken, no ladies in the room, just in case. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for your wise words, and several hooks that I will refer back to, or you'll pick up the links as we go through. The idea of my slide, hope for the best, plan for the worst. For those that know a little bit about the film world, you might recognise that from a Jack Reacher quote, whether you've read the books, seen the Tom Cruise version of the film, or the more recent Netflix. But it is interesting how sometimes authors come up with phrases that actually are quite powerful. And from a safety point of view, that idea of hope for the best, but plan for the worst is actually fundamentally what we should be doing. And therefore I thought it was a useful place to start today. And as Ed alluded to, no matter how good your process, your planning might be, I think we could all probably say we are vulnerable to that idea of, quote, stuff happens. On any given day, I'm sure the nuclear industry in Japan didn't think that they were going to get the problems that they had, for example. So if we're alive to that fact that, volcanoes in Scotland might be unlikely, although Arthur's Seat is there just to remind us occasionally, but there are things in the world that we are vulnerable to, that we may not know yet. We may have done our bow ties, we may have thought this through, but despite that, we get caught out. So if stuff happens, and we accept that we are vulnerable to that idea of an event, this very simple equation of E plus R equals O, that the event plus your response equals your outcome. And so if the event is fixed, the only thing that is going to impact you, the outcome of that event that you are facing, that disruption, that emergency, that safety incident, is the quality of your response. Because the event has happened. So you can't change that. So if we accept that the fact that we want as good a response as we possibly can in order that we have minimal impact, then it follows that there are things that we should be thinking about and designing in at the start, as Ed was alluding to, so that we get it right in the build phase and the development and the thinking phase, rather than trying to bolt it on at the expensive time afterwards. And this, you can tell, PowerPoint necessarily wasn't my forte, wasn't around when I went through school, but the idea that we start with a safety case or a body of work that creates that safety start point, and we want to get to the end point where we have a production facility, and in the middle there will be a number of activities, whether that be liaising with the Fire and Rescue Service to identify your fire plan, your medical plan, your emergency response plan, your business continuity plan, blah, blah, blah. There are a number of steps that we will take. But once we've got to the stage that we can make it, that's not the end of the story, because obviously with hydrogen we need to also be able to make sure that it works for when we're moving it, and then also it works for when we're using it. So it's that whole process, and there will be activities and steps that we need to factor in as we go. And you go, okay, yeah, oil and gas have been doing this for decades, we'll just borrow their good ideas, or whatever your perspective might be on some of this, or not perhaps you, but your leadership team, when you come to them and say, I need some budget to be able to do this. So what makes this different? And I was thinking about this and listening to some of the conversations earlier today. This idea, as a hydrogen industry, we're facing a historical perspective, and we need to win over the stakeholders in the first place that this is safe. And we all in the room know that it is, or if it's managed correctly, it's just as safe as any other fuel. But people go back to the 1930s in Hindenburg, and you go, hang on a second, we've moved on a bit since then, and they don't understand the full story. So we've got to buy people in with the story that we're telling them, and be able to demonstrate that what we're doing is safe. The technical challenges, even I, as a simple infantry officer for 27 years, understand that hydrogen molecules are different. Yeah. Okay, so it is technically different. And lots of the demonstrators and the smaller models that we've had at the moment that we're learning the lessons from, as Ed said, we're then now talking about, okay, what happens if we bolt it together and we're doing it at scale? Is that different? New industrial locations, I couldn't think of a better way of phrasing it, but when we're talking about putting facilities in Cromarty, for example, Cromarty is not used to large industrial processes. So does the population there facilitate you think in that way? And I appreciate distilling industry and so on is up there, and but you'll get my point that we're not going to the heart of the industrial sites that we may have done in the past. And with that comes this idea of an inexperienced workforce. That you're not going to somewhere that has got a long legacy of oh, we've been doing this for 40 years, therefore the university trains people to do the right things. Thinking Robert Gordon University up in Aberdeen and all its oil and gas stuff. We don't have that centre of excellence yet that is co-located with where we're going to be doing this work. So where does the workforce learn the detailed knowledge that we're going to require them when we're all competing for that same workforce? When we've got multiple sites all saying, actually, I want the best person, no, well, I want the best person, etc. So where do we find that workforce without that experience? So that's what I think makes it different where we are hydrogen at the moment to where perhaps other industrial processes are. We talked about, or Ed spoke about the bow tie. Clearly, I do more Janet and John does bow tie rather than Ed's very technical piece. And the event in the middle, and then you've got what we're going to be looking at, that first layer on the right-hand side there, the response bit, so that we can minimise the impact, going back to my E plus R equals O. How do we reduce that outcome? So the only way to do it is to be good at our response. So if we accept all that, what I'd like to do is spend the next 15 minutes or so going through a handful of what I think from 27 years in the Army, 10 years of doing this with the energy industry, are some good ideas and concepts. And many of you may go, well, that's reasonably obvious. Great, well, I've got 8 of them, so hopefully there's a couple for each of you that you'll go, oh, actually, that's I hadn't thought of it through that lens, or actually by phrasing it that way, that might get the buy-in from someone else that will then unlock them attending a conference that I want them to attend, or a workshop, or to release some budget to be able to do some training, etc. And the first one of these for a good response, if you look down the side, the mnemonic spells placid. Placid is another word for calm, which is quite an easy way then for me to remember it, because in a good response you want people to be calm. But the letters, I think, are all the good components of a good response. So you need good planning, you need good leadership. And how many people have ever been in an exercise and suddenly the leader is the senior person in the room, senior on salary? But if you're senior on salary, you probably had papers presented to you to detailed explanation of what decision you can make. And suddenly we're in a position where we don't know what the answer is, we don't have the full picture, you need to make decisions with half the information. And those people that typically lead your organisation are suddenly out of their depth because they're not used to, not experienced in making decisions under stress. So how do you find the right leaders unless you do some of this work before you start producing the hydrogen and you realise that the risk is live? The rest, the acid, activation, can you get the right people in the right place at the right time? Well, that sounds very easy. It's a bit more challenging. Who are the right people? Where do you want to get them? Is it now on teams, etc., etc.? Communications, we talked, or I spoke about stakeholders. Who is it that you're communicating with in an incident, and do you have the right methods of doing that? Hard enough on any given day, put yourself in a cyber attack, and you don't have all the new communications. How do you engage with the local council? How do you call the Scottish Fire and Rescue? How do you speak to your neighbours, your physical neighbours around the plant, let alone your own employees, and tell them what's going on? Information management Ed alluded to, and I've taken away a little note about the ISO standard. But all this data, this information that you're going to have swilling around in a response, if you don't understand what's being put in front of you, you won't make good decisions. So how do we manage that data so that we present it to the leadership team in a way that they can then say, right, let's go with that course of action? And then finally, decision making, which I'll come on to in a later point. So my second point is about mindset, and I stole this from Mark Beaumont, who, really interesting article, he talked about performance mindset rather than growth mindset. And so many of us I struggle with my daughter who's now 22, but it's all right, Dad, I've learned. No, but you got it wrong. And in an emergency response, saying it's all right, I've learned, might not be good enough because 5 people have died. So this idea of, it's fine, I've got a growth mindset. Well, that's lovely in training, but when bad stuff is happening, I nearly swore, when bad stuff is happening, we don't have time for growth mindset. We have to be in performance mindset. And you have to have a team that's going to step up and deliver and expect to deliver. Not be patted on the back and say, you tried really hard. No, that's not good enough. And so many of us are now so immersed in the idea of it's all right, everyone's a winner at the school 5-year-old sports day. No, performance matters. And how do you weave that into your culture when actually we're all about giving each other a hug and everyone's doing a good job? Mark Beaumont clearly set the world record for cycling around the world in something like 5 minutes or something ridiculous. And his approach was he didn't have a choice on whether he was going to be, it was a good day or a bad day. He had to cycle for 18 hours every day. That was it. So that's where the performance mindset comes from. But I think trying to weave that into your organisation of responders, that you are expecting to turn up and perform, not just learn, is a difference. Number 3 of my 8, this is stolen from the Emergency Planning College, an organisation down at Easingwold, and this idea for information management. What do we know, what don't we know, and what are we assuming? It's so simple. Put it on a whiteboard, 3 columns, put it in your notebook when you're sat there during an emergency response. What is fact? What do you think is the case? And what are the questions out there that you need to ask the person on the ground? Can you confirm, has the ambulance turned up to remove those 5 people? Because you don't know. And once you start to put things in really simple 3-column format, it helps with communications, it helps with decision making, because it presents a picture. And even I can manage 3 columns on a piece of paper, so it doesn't require huge technology. It's a very simple way of doing it. And Colin Powell, who was the US General in Gulf War I, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, and only then tell me what you think, and be sure to distinguish amongst them. Clearly, if you are trying to make decisions about whether you turn off a valve, turn on a valve, close the plant, etc., you want to know what's what. So how do you receive that information as the leader? Set it out in your plans nice and early, train your people to expect to work in that way before you go live with the production of hydrogen. And before I said I'd come back to decision making, and I mentioned this idea in normal business case, normal business life, we have time to make decisions. And financial investment decisions, for example, is probably 6 months of detailed analysis of documents before we decide to go one way or the other. In a crisis, you probably are measuring that in minutes, and you don't know the full picture. And you've got to look yourself in the mirror the day after and say, did I make the right decision? Did I do the best that I could for my people? And so the emergency services have a joint decision model that is lovely. You can look on it online on Jessup. The Emergency Planning College again and the military use a slightly different model, and the bit I've highlighted in the middle is ends, ways and means. So once you've established what the situation is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? So if you're sat in there, your stuff has happened, as I said earlier on, in this phase or overall, what is our end state that we're looking to achieve? Once we've worked out what it is that we're trying to achieve, what are our options? Can we do A, can we do B, can we do C? Which is the best course of action? And then, do we have the resources to be able to do it? And if we don't, where do we get it from? And now I've made a decision. Because of all of that, we're going for option A, option B. And by following a process, it is defendable, rather than just, well, I didn't really think about the others. No. Have a process, train your people in a process so that they are presenting the information to you in a way that enables you to assess your options and defend them should it come to a fatal accident inquiry or whatever. Number 5 of my thoughts is this idea of battle procedure. And my very first week at Sandhurst in the mid-80s, we identified this thing called battle procedure, which is about getting a soldier to the right place at the right time with the right kit, ready to do the job that they're doing. And it sounds sort of quite obvious, isn't that what we all should be doing? but because I happen to like my food, it stuck with me because they used the mnemonic cake. And although this is a military thing, I think it still applies to a good response team. C is concurrent activity. Can we be doing more than one thing at once? Can we get one team thinking about planning for the recovery, someone else thinking about care for people, someone else thinking about media, so we're doing multiple things at the same time rather than one, then the other, then the other, spinning multiple plates. Anticipation. Through experience, we know what to expect, what's likely to come next. So rather than waiting for the team leader to say, oh, actually, you're the HR person, can you find the next of kin details? A good team, they know what to anticipate and they don't need to be asked, and therefore it just speeds up the whole process. Knowledge of the response system. Colleague David and I were up in Orkney, as Stuart said, with EMEC last year now, and we were talking about, do we know what the local authorities' response is going to be? Do we know what Scottish Fire and Rescue's response is going to be? Do we know what the community are going to say if you have a gas leak in the middle of the harbour area in Orkney? All those sorts of knowledge gaps. Sorry, in EMEC they weren't gaps, but you want to close that so you know what the response is going to be, what their capabilities are going to be, what they're going to turn up with, where they're going to park their truck. I appreciate Buncefield talk is coming up after this. All that sort of chaos that can erupt in an emergency situation. And if we know what to expect, we can manage it. And then efficient drills at the end is, can we actually make it work? Can we pull it together in a way that means that we're going to do it quickly? Number 6, in my mind, third-party resilience. If we're building a site, if we're relying on third parties, which all of us do, we're not experts in everything, do we actually think they're going to be with us for the long term? And I put up the picture of Carillion because everyone remembers that once upon a time Carillion were a massive company, and then as far as the public were concerned, almost overnight they suddenly weren't a massive company. So if we are going to invest millions, tens of millions of pounds on a site, signing a signature with someone, a critical third party, you might have a penalty clause that says, oh, you're going to pay me £1 million if you fail. But actually you've lost your business because they haven't delivered on time and you've lost your reputation, etc., etc. So doing the due diligence to understand, are they actually as robust as we need them to be, is really important. Sometimes as a vendor you say, oh, please attach your business continuity plan to the process, to the bidding process. Great, congratulations. Who's actually reading the business continuity plan to understand whether it's ever going to work? Well, someone in procurement is probably not the authority to judge, and yet you're basing your future business safety on their stuff. And once you've identified who these third parties are, let's bring them into the room. Let's share good practice, let's share exercises, let's make them a partner, because we need them so that we deliver our excellence. Therefore, why would we not want to have them inside the room rather than creating barriers of, well, no, I can't speak to you because it's all about budgets or whatever it might be. The flip side of the response phase is we do react, respond, and then ultimately we're trying to recover our business. And the little diagram on the right there is this idea that emergency response, initially there's lots of activity for emergency response, fire service turning up, ambulances, people going to muster, etc. And then it starts to draw down. But it's overlapped with the red, which is, in a good team, you're then starting to order do terms of reference for an investigation, work out how to get the plant back up and running again as quickly as you can, so that you then satisfy your customers, so that you continue to earn money. And the bottom right hand side there, pick this up, it is such a simple idea of what does business continuity need to work. Well, as a business you need cash. Where do I get cash from? I get it from clients. What are clients buying? They're buying capabilities. So in the simplest possible terms, what are the capabilities that the clients are buying so that they're giving me some cash? And how quickly can I get them back up and running again? Well, if I can write that down and resource it so that I actually understand that I need 3 people to do this, 5 people to do that, I need a separate office to do this, etc., then I have a business continuity capability. And yes, you can employ someone like me to come and do it for you, but you know all the answers already. It's your business. So just thinking through, what is business critical? What data do I need to be able to manage that? And then I've put this idea of shopping lists of what resources are required. And if you think, after an incident, business continuity team comes together. Some of the stuff they'll be able to do themselves, but some of it you might say, well, I'm the production department, I need some help from HR, I need some help from finance, I need some help from procurement. Great. I've gone down my shopping aisle, I go to checkout with the chief financial officer, he's going to sign it off or she's going to sign it off. Great. Business continuity, that's it, done. So it is a relatively simple thing, provided you plan for it before the incident happens. Because when the incident happens, you're losing clients, you're losing public confidence, and then that effort to rebuild that confidence when someone else has stolen that march on you is much more difficult. And the number of people who say to me, oh, we survived COVID. Well, okay, COVID, we had furlough, everyone was in the same position. It's not the same as you singularly facing a disastrous event. Whether that be your IT team all winning the lottery, or whether it being your plant being destroyed by an explosion, they are all disruptive events. Once we've got this idea of we've got a whole lot of paperwork assembled, a plan is only as good as the effort spent bringing it to life, if you like. So we always talk about this idea of, rather than going straight in, we've got a budget for one exercise a year, therefore we'll cram everything into that exercise and we'll just break people and it'll be unrealistic. And it'll start with a bit of crawl, then walk, and then run. So the final part of a program of exercises, perhaps after 2 or 3 years, might be a multi-agency joint exercise with emergency services with the local authority. But you've started the program with a tabletop discussion or a scenario-based discussion to just talk it through amongst your colleagues, and then you're layering on capability and building that trust, that performance mindset that we said at the start, so that people are actually confident that should the worst happen, you've got a plan that is going to work. Finally, some tips for consideration, and linking back on the top bullet there to what Ed was talking about, resilience by design would be my buzz phrase for this type of audience, that we all know what's out there, but if we can build that in at the mindset at the start, thinking in every project you do, what if something goes wrong? What if it's delayed? What if the regulatory system changes? What if? Then also includes, what if once it's done, something goes wrong and we're now in a world of pain, worst case scenario, fatalities, casualties, etc. You can read while I talk, but the bottom point there, the KISS principle, keep it simple and straightforward. Whatever it is that we develop, we design, we start to build and train people in, it simply must work. So you can have the sexiest IT system in the world to be able to capture this, that and the other and manage your data and do this and do that, but at the end it's a man or a woman in a leadership position that's making decisions on, are we going to turn this valve off or this valve off, to be able to save lives, put out fires, manage the situation, and therefore it must work. I started with this idea of E plus R equals O, and once the event has occurred, the only way to change outcome is by the quality of the response. I finished with the idea, therefore, are you hoping for the best, or are you planning for the worst? So, as Mayor Giuliani said, and then was copied in the Deepwater Horizon film, hope is not a strategy. So hopefully, you're not relying on that in your planning going forward. So, gentlemen, thanks very much for your time.